नमस्कार दोस्तों। अमेरिका की अगर हम खास तौर पे बात करें तो एक अजीब सी क्राइसिस वहां क्रिएशन हो रहा है। जिस तरह से बॉन्ड यील्ड पिछले कुछ दिनों में राइज हुई है, और नॉट ओनली अमेरिका, पूरे ग्लोबल मार्केट में आप देखें तो बॉन्ड मार्केट ये साफ इशारा कर रहा है कि इन्फ्लेशन तेजी से शूट अप हो रहा है। और उससे कोई भी देश बाकी नहीं, चाहे जर्मनी हो, फ्रांस हो, जापान हो, इंडिया हो, हर जगह की बॉन्ड यील्ड आपको इशारा करती है। तो अमेरिका के पास चॉइस क्या है? क्या वो इंटरेस्ट रेट को बढ़ाएं, जो अभी मीटिंग होने वाली है उनकी सितंबर में, तो क्या होगा, और अगर नहीं बढ़ाते हैं तो क्या होगा? तो इन्फ्लेशन का खतरा, और साथ ही एसेट में यानी मार्केट में या तमाम तरीके के एसेट क्लासेस में फॉल का खतरा है। जापानीज येन में जबरदस्त वीकनेस आई, तो उसको मैनेज करने के लिए यूएस और जापान ने ज्वाइंट ऑपरेशन किया। कुछ समय के लिए सस्टेन कर सकता है, लेकिन प्रॉब्लम सॉल्व नहीं हो रही है। और तीसरा बड़ा महत्वपूर्ण सवाल है कि इंडिया अपने आप को इस पोजीशन में कैसे रखता है, क्योंकि हम रिसीविंग एंड पे हैं। जापान में कुछ होगा तो भी हमारे ऊपर इम्पैक्ट आएगा, और यूएस में कुछ होगा तब भी हमारे ऊपर इम्पैक्ट आएगा। इस प्रश्न को समझने के लिए आज मेरे साथ हमेशा की तरह शान सर हैं, एन षणमुगनाथन, जो उनको हम लोग शान के नाम से जानते हैं। ऑथर है, एनालिस्ट है, और एसेट क्लासेस पे, खास तौर पे जो रियल एसेट्स हैं उनका बहुत अच्छा एनालिसिस करते हैं। और एक बड़ी मोटी सी किताब भी लिखी है सर ने, जिसको हम लोगों ने पढ़ा और उस पर कई बार हम बातचीत कर चुके हैं। मेन क्वेश्चन आज हमारे दिमाग में ये 3 एजेंडे गए हैं। पहला एजेंडा है कि डॉलर की जो पोजीशन इस समय है, डॉलर इंडेक्स को हम लोग रोज ट्रैक करते हैं, उसका और इन्फ्लेशन का क्या रिलेशन बन रहा है। जापानीज येन क्राइसिस कितनी सीवियर हो चुकी है और कैसे सॉल्व होगी और आगे क्या होगा। और तीसरा, इसमें इंडिया ने अपने को कैसे पोजीशन कर रखा और क्या इम्पैक्ट इस पर आ सकता है। तो रिसेंटली अभी सर ने एक आर्टिकल लिखा है जीरो हेज में, जिसमें इसी बात पर डिस्कशन किया गया है कि करेंसी क्राइसिस 1.0 या जीएफसी 2.0, दोनों में से क्या होने वाला है, और दोनों ही हाईली लाइकली। तो सांसद, थैंक यू सो मच फॉर ज्वाइनिंग अस दिस इम्पोर्टेंट टॉपिक विल डिस्कस। सो फर्स्ट यू एक्सप्लेन मी what you are going to tell us.
Yeah, good morning, Neeraj. A happy morning to all your viewers. Yeah, we can discuss the key issues, that have been discussed in the media over the last few months. The big issue, or as I see it as the elephant in the room, is actually what is happening to the US dollar and to the US economy. So we'll start with that. And the second issue is apparently the US has bailed out the Japanese yen. That is what has been discussed in the media. That is not the case at all. And we'll touch upon that. And three is that we are headed into a massive crisis in the weeks and months ahead. I don't see how we can end 2026 without this crisis actually breaking out, and what India should do at that particular point in time. Okay, so we can discuss these three issues, and we can start with the US dollar, because that is a big issue and that is a fundamental driver to all other issues. All other issues are just symptoms or basically outcomes of what is happening to the US dollar. Now, Trump and the US government has been portraying that the US economy is doing well, it is in the best shape possible, etc. But that is not the case at all. And if you look at the numbers a bit deep, it becomes very, very obvious. Let's take the case of the national debt. It's very close to $40 trillion at this particular point in time. Okay, but if you see the pace of increase, it is astonishing. In the month of July alone, they added something like $430 billion. If you annualize that, okay, that's something like $5 trillion. Okay, no, there were a lot of one-offs, but even if you exclude those one-offs, it is something like $4 trillion of addition to a national debt at a time when the economy is supposedly doing well. Why would they even be doing that? Okay, that's a question that investors should be asking themselves. And two, if you look at the employment numbers, on the surface, they have got a extremely low number of something like 4.1% or something like that. But that is only because they have something, the percentage of people who are actually employed as part of the labor force, that has dropped to 61.4%. That is the lowest number in 50 years, excluding the COVID year. So why would people drop out of the labor force? This 61.4% is a percentage of people in the working age who are either working or are actively looking for a job. Now, people are dropping out of the labor force, and hence you are having a low unemployment number. It is not because people are finding jobs. So again, this shows a massive crisis in the US. And the third one is the price inflation itself. Again, if you look at the July numbers, they said price inflation came down. But what is the absolute number? It's something like 3.1%, which is substantially higher than the 2% upper target that Bosch has set for himself. So if you look at the data points, everything is screaming stagflation in the US, which is you've got extremely high levels of unemployment, and you've got extremely high levels of inflation. Now, this official number of about 3% 3% price inflation that they're talking about, this is not the real inflation in the economy itself. For example, in the slide that is there, there's this organization called Shadow Government Statistics that just simply recalculates the actual inflation using the methodology used by the US government in the 1990s. So the US government has been continuously tampering with the actual methodology to report a number lower than what it is by about 4 to 5 percentage points. So if you simply use the methodology that the US government previously used in the 1990s, they would be reporting something like a 7 to 8% price inflation. So everything is screaming stagflation in the US, something very similar to what the US experienced during the 1970s. So why hasn't it actually burst? The only thing that is against this are the stock market bubbles at this particular point in time. And it's not just one bubble. You've got a housing bubble and you've got a stock market bubble, especially an AI bubble at this point. Now, if you look at the housing bubble itself, the peak of the housing prices are actually well beyond us, at least 18 months behind us. And if you look at the sales data of the housing numbers, this is comparable to what happened after the 2008 bubble burst. Actually, you can use the next slide, Neeraj. Yeah. Okay, so this is the sales numbers of the US. This has practically collapsed, and this has happened simply because interest rates have gone up. And there is no way for the interest rates to actually come down again. Long-term rates are set to go substantially higher. So prices have not changed a whole lot, but it is just a matter of time that massive people recognize that high interest rates are actually here to stay when they start fire selling the houses. And that will happen in the months ahead. But the bigger bubble at this particular point in time that will actually open up the floodgates would be the AI bubble. You have got one massive bubble, and people say that nobody rings a bell at the top. But the SpaceX IPO was a screaming bell at the top, and I am not making this up. If you read through the SpaceX IPO, it says one of the objectives of SpaceX is to extend the light of consciousness to the stars. I am not making this up. This is part of the prospectus of SpaceX IPO. And it's not a typo. It appears something like 8 to 10 times within the prospectus. This looks like one of the new age spiritual gurus, okay, rather than a businessman saying, right? And if you look at the businesses of SpaceX, they've got one profit-making business, okay, which is a Starlink, and that makes something like $4 billion in profits. But the capex for the AI business, okay, which is supposed to bring in upwards of 90% of their revenues in the future, actually burn something like $40 to $50 billion at the barest minimum on an annualized basis. So apart from this IPO, they'll have to continuously either issue equity or keep raising money in the market for them to survive. Now, this is trading at 100 times sales. Okay, I think Musk was actually mocking at the investors when he wrote this, especially the phrase "the light of consciousness." I mean, this makes no sense. And again, if you read the prospectus, one more thing was to set up a colony in Mars. I mean, people who read basic physics, okay, will know that it's not possible at all. So, I mean, what is he even trying to say here? No, I mean, Musk is obviously an absolutely brilliant businessman. Absolutely, I'm not doubting that at all. Okay, but there's a limit on how much you can extend in terms of valuations. Now, even if you look at the single biggest actual achievement of Musk, it happens to be Tesla, right? It's an absolutely brilliant car. I'm not questioning that at all. But if you just compare Tesla and BYD side by side, there is no way Tesla can compete against BYD. The cars of BYD are far superior. And if you look at markets around the world where both compete on an equal footing, BYD trumps Tesla cars by a huge distance. Okay. But in the US, just because the Trump tariffs, okay, BYD is not able to compete on an even keel with Tesla. But it's a question of time before BYD takes down Tesla. I mean, BYD is going to be the hands down winner in this race. Although the market cap, if you look at the market cap today, Tesla has a much higher market cap. But it's a question of time that people realize that BYD cars are far superior and far cheaper to the ones offered by Tesla. So even the one significant contribution that can be proven of Musk is actually coming under threat. Now there is no way this SpaceX is going to realize their dreams, and this is a massive bubble. So as and when one of these bubbles, either the housing bubble or the AI bubble or the private bubble, as and when these bubbles burst, US will get into a crisis. And that is a fork in the road where the role of watch will become very, very critical. And that's what I had explained in the article also. The crisis itself
Right.
is unavoidable, but what happens after the crisis, okay, becomes a big issue.
ओके सो अभी जो शान सर ने समझा उसको मैं हिंदी में ब्रीफ कर दूं जल्दी से कि जो यूएस की स्थिति है उसमें बहुत ही ज्यादा एलिवेटेड लेवल पे बबल बन रहा है. एक तो इन्फ्लेशन शूट अप कर गया. एक्चुअल इन्फ्लेशन अगर आप देखेंगे तो 6-7% तक जाएगा, जो अभी 4-5% तक तो मिनिमम जाना चाहिए. दूसरा वो कह रहे हैं कि हाउसिंग में बबल है, और ये बात सही है. 30 साल का मॉर्गेज रेट अगर आप देखेंगे तो 5.28 तक पहुंच गया है. तीसरा जो है डेट लेवल का बहुत ही ज्यादा इशू यूएस में खड़ा हो रहा है. डेट टू जीडीपी का रेशियो देखें या मंथली बेसिस पे देखें, वो बहुत ज्यादा है. तो एवरीवेयर थिंग्स आर एलिवेटेड, और उसमें सबसे बड़ा चैलेंज आ रहा है एआई का, जो हम लोगों ने शुरुआती पहली प्लेट में आपको दिखाया था. आप उसको देखें कि किस तरीके से इन्फ्लेशन बढ़ा रहा और वो करेंसी प्रेशर डाल रहा है. शान सर, एक लेटेस्ट रिपोर्ट ये कहती है कि करेंटली द AI companies or tech companies are raising $600 billion from the market, right?
Correct.
But that's a very small figure. Today only I read a news. They are talking about $3 trillion off the balance sheet arrangement. $3 trillion. So it's a huge number. And AI companies cannot survive if they don't do capex. हम लोग हिंदी में कहते हैं कि उन्होंने शेयर की सवारी कर ली है, अब वो शेयर से उतर नहीं सकते हैं. उतरेंगे तो शेयर खा जाएगा, और शेयर की सवारी करनी तो आप कंटिन्यूअसली दौड़ते रहना आपको.
Correct.
So if you stop the capex, you will be out of the race, and if you continue the capex, you don't need money, or money has a cost, and cost is going up. There is a scenario. मेरा क्वेश्चन इसमें आपसे ये है कि what Kevin Warsh will do, whether they raise the rate or they leave it as it is, or in some point of time, because government has to fund the AI story, can they reduce rate also?
Okay, you asked several questions here, Neeraj. Okay, so let me try to answer one by one. First thing is, I don't think Watch is going to do like anything substantial till a crisis hits. Okay, I don't think he's going to raise rates or cut rates. He'll continue to do the QE that he's been doing. Okay, but in terms of rates, I don't think we are going to have substantive movements till we get into a big crisis, at which point he'll be forced to react. He won't have an option. Okay. Next, the AI bubble has to burst. There is no other way out. There is no business case for AI. Now, if you look at the two main organizations, OpenAI as well as Anthropic, they were planning for $1 trillion IPOs. Okay, but now that is under serious question. I don't think anybody is going to fund it, simply because you've got Chinese versions that are about 80%, 90% as effective as the LLMs offered by these two companies, but that come at a fraction of the cost. Now, a whole lot of US companies that have been using these two models, which is ChatGPT as well as Claude, there is sufficient evidence that they have moved on to the Chinese models because it's vastly cheaper as compared to these two LLMs. So the AI bubble will burst. There is absolutely nothing that the US government can do to stop that. Now, what happens after the bubble burst? And that is a fork in the road. And there, I think it can play out in two possible ways. One is we would enter into a global financial crisis 2.0, and that is if Wash does the correct things, or we could get into a global currency crisis that will lead to substantial fall in the value of the US dollar. Now, these are the two possible options. There is no escaping the crisis itself. We have to go through the crisis, especially in the US. Now, what is the right thing? Now, the US has gotten into these bubbles primarily because of central banks' influence in the markets. Now, people call this as a crisis of capitalism. 2008 was called as a crisis of capitalism That is not the case at all. 2008 crisis happened because of interventions of central banks in the central markets and the markets by keeping the rates low. Okay, that is what caused the 2008 crisis. It's because the US Fed kept the rates artificially low at something like 1% for about 5 years. That's what inflated the housing bubble. So this is not a crisis of capitalism. This was a crisis caused by central banks. And that is exactly the same crisis that we are actually getting into again. We are getting into a much bigger crisis because the central banks have made the same mistakes on a much grander scale. If 2008 crisis was caused by keeping rates at 1% for about 4 or 5 years by Greenspan, now we kept it at 0% for 15 years after the 2008 bubble. So we have inflated much bigger bubbles. This is a crisis of central banking that we're getting into. And this time, I don't think they can brand it as a crisis of capitalism because it's so much more obvious as and when currencies lose value. So as and when this crisis sits, if Watch were to do the correct things, it would mean that he puts inflation rate below the rate of the Fed funds rate, which is if the actual price inflation is 7%, he has to place a Fed funds rate at 8, 9, 10%. He has to do QTs to roll back the excess money supply that has been in the US. So these are the current things to do. Now, if he does these things, we are going to have a huge stock market crash. We are going to have an even bigger housing bubble crash, but the dollar will retain a semblance of the value. And that's what I mean by global financial crisis 2.0. Okay, wherein assets such as stocks and housing falls. Okay, but the US dollar holds value. If you want to see it in terms of the Dixie itself, it could be 70, 80 or something thereabouts. The dollar is still going to lose value against other currencies, but it will retain a very large parts of the value if Watch does the correct things. But it's quite unlikely he does the correct things. He's likely to do a repeat of what the US Fed tried after the 2008 crisis. The argument will always be that, look, we had a similar crisis in 2008. This is what the Fed did, and we emerged out of the crisis successfully. So why not repeat the same? Yeah.
Sir, please explain me what right thing you are saying if Watch do the right thing. What is the right thing actually?
So look, the objective of a central bank is to actually maintain the purchasing power of the currency. Okay, that's why central banks are there, right? Now, how do you maintain the purchasing power of a currency? It is by offering real rates that are above the rates of price inflation, wherein people have got an incentive to save. Okay, that way you retain the purchasing power, and by doing the right thing means keeping the Fed funds rates above the rate of price inflation, the actual price inflation, which is 7-8%. If you remember, Paul Volcker, as part of the 1970s, the actual price inflation at that point was 13 to 14%, and he kept interest rates at 20 percentage points, a full 6 to 8 percentage points above price inflation. That is what saved the US dollar in the 1970s and the 1980s. Okay, that plus Reagan, right? Now, I'm not talking about a 7 to 8% real yield, but have a nominal yield of at least 1 to 2 percentage points higher than the price inflation. Okay, that is absolutely mandatory if the Fed were to save the dollar. That plus QT has to happen where they roll back the excess money supply that they have created all these years. That would be the correct thing to do.
सर एक छोटा सा एआई पे बात करें, फिर मैं आपकी एक कैश 22 सिचुएशन पे बात करूंगा.
Sure.
Recently I learned Entropic's revenue run rate for the 2026 is $65 billion.
Right.
The annual revenue rate is $65 billion, which is 8 times higher than the last year. And they are coming up with the IPO, maybe September, October, maybe they are coming out. So you see, AI companies are making money, they are generating revenues, but still their valuations are so high, so they cannot sustain. That's why it will collapse.
No, AI companies are not making money. You are quoting the revenues, Neeraj. Look at the profits. They are not making profits. They are nowhere close to making profits. And this bubble is very, very different from the 2000 Nasdaq bubble. There, it was a one-time investment. Okay, that kind of generated actually profits forever into the future. Okay, but if you look at the investments in chips made by Anthropic as well as OpenAI, these chips have a lifespan of 3 to 4 years, which means they'll have to keep repeating this capex every 3 to 4 years. This is very different from the 2000 Nasdaq bubble that we had, where it was a one-time investment. Now this is not a one-time investment, and even these even this 8 times revenues that they're getting, these companies are nowhere close to profitability, despite having a shortened depreciation, and this is despite having a longer depreciation cycle than what they should actually be having. So
Agree.
we are nowhere close to making money at this point in time. And I don't think the business model of these companies have proven, because a vast majority of the US companies have started migrating to the cheaper LLMs over the last few years. Over the last few months. So I don't think these companies are going to make money. There is no way for this AI bubble to sustain itself at this point in time. Having said that, I'll make one important point, Neeraj. I'm not saying AI itself is useless. The biggest
Yeah.
bubbles happens to be like in the space where it's most useful, right? So, let's say, for example, we had a tulip bubble. Tulip bubble was not big. Okay, that's because it is just a flower. But if you look at the real bubbles that have happened in the US in the past, okay, one was a railroad bubble in the 1870s, and then there was an electricity bubble at the start of the previous centuries. Now, these two technologies are real technologies. Okay, they transform the lives of the people in the US, and yet the valuations of the companies were so high compared to the value they deliver. Okay, that the bubbles burst. So similar to that, AI is an absolutely fantastic tool. It is going to transform our lives. I'm not questioning that at all. It is possibly going to transform in a way that we can't even imagine today. But that said,
Agree.
the valuation that we are paying is so much over than what these companies can possibly even deliver. Okay, that the bubbles have to burst.
Perfectly said. AI is real, but the valuations are not real.
Right.
Now the second question, आपने कहा कि was if they do the right thing, means they raise the rates,
Right.
then they will preserve the purchasing power of the dollar and the people. If they do not do this,
Right.
then what will happen? Then there will be a currency crisis, right?
Correct. So the options are a global currency crisis,
तो सर
and that's
आपने
what I've
फंसा दिया
explained.
मुझे, आपने
Pardon?
वॉर्स को फंसा दिया
No,
कि आप
I
कुछ
didn't
भी
put
करो
it.
गड़बड़
So
आप कुछ भी करोगे
okay.
गड़बड़ होगा, आप बढ़ाओगे तो भी
So
गड़बड़, नहीं बढ़ाओगे तो भी, मतलब एसेट बर्स्ट होना ही होना है. यू प्लीज
correct.
एक्सप्लेन द करेंसी प्रॉब्लम.
So this is a crisis that started in either 1913 when they formed the US Fed, or in 1971 when they got off the gold standard. Depends on how you want to view the starting point. So this has been a crisis in the making for a long time, and that's what I've explained in the article. If you can just if you can show the zero hedge article.
Yes, yes, I'll show.
Yeah, this one. So it's either going to be a global financial crisis 2.0, that is if wash ways to raise rates substantially, or we are going to have a global currency crisis 2.0, 1.0. And I think the overwhelming odds at this point in time are in favor of a global currency crisis. There is no way Wash can bring himself to raise rates substantially and do a QT. Even if you see the last few weeks, he has started QE, despite he's saying that he's not going to do quantitative easing. He has been doing quantitative easing, right? So we are headed towards a global currency crisis, and we are also going to go back to a gold standard. There is no other solution to this particular crisis. For far too long, for the last 55 years, okay, we have been living under an illusion that pieces of paper where some numbers are printed on it have value. I'm talking about national currencies, and that cannot be the case. We'll have to go back to a gold standard, and we'll go back to a gold standard only when we get into a currency crisis. There is no way we are going to do the correct thing in the absence of a crisis. This crisis is going to force the hands of the government towards a gold standard, and the first country that is going to go on to the gold standard is going to be China. It's not going to be the US. China will get into a gold standard very soon, and that will force the hands of the US to follow suit.
So now explain the Japanese crisis, Japanese currency crisis. Both the countries, US and
Right.
Japan, managed and they intervened and
Correct.
supported the currency. What is happening
So,
there?
yeah. So the Japanese currency, the yen, has been falling continuously for the last few years. Again, this was a crisis caused by as to what is referred to as Abenomics. Uh, Shinzo Abe tried to solve a problem that was not there. He said price inflation in the Japan was too low. There's nothing like too low. Okay, but he said it's too low, and hence he kept expanding the government budget year on year, so that at this particular point in time, at this particular point in time, the debt to GDP of the Japanese government, it's something like 240 percentage points, is absolutely high, and that is putting severe stress on the yen. And so the yen has been falling continuously, and this is causing price inflation in the Japan to spike, and hence the Japanese government wanted to control the yen. Now the strange part is to say that the US Fed bailed out Japan. That's what has been discussed in the media. But let's look at it. One is US, which is the largest debtor nation on the face of the earth, and Japan, till a few years back, was the largest creditor nation on the face of the earth. At this particular point, even now, it's the third largest creditor nation on the planet after Germany and China. So how is the world's largest debtor able to manage the largest creditor? I mean, isn't it really funny when you think about it? And if you look at the reserves of Japan, they are holding $1.1 trillion US dollar as part of their reserves. So why should they depend on the US government to bail out the yen? They can sell the dollars and buy the yen. It's a very simple, straightforward solution. So this was not a bailout of yen by the US government. The US government knows that if the yen continues to fall, at that point, Japan will start selling the treasuries. And Japan at this particular point is the largest holder of the treasuries. So in some sense, you can look at Japan as a banker to the US government. Okay, they fund the debt of the US government. And if the banker goes bust, okay, then what happens to the person who is actually like issuing the debt? So this was not a bailout of the yen by US. This was the US bailing itself out. They had no other options to it. So that's what has been happening to the Japanese government. Now, what should the Japan do to solve its issue? The first thing is they've got 200 and their debt to GDP happens to be 240 percentage points, but they also have substantial assets. They have something like $1.1 trillion of US treasuries, plus they have substantial holdings as part. So if you look at the debt of Japan, it's something like 240% of GDP. Now, how is it that the largest creditor nation also has a large debt? And that's because of the Japanese population. They have a huge savings rate, and despite having this ultra low interest rate for almost 30 years, they save something like 30% of GDP. So they are able to fund the debt of the Japanese government and also lend money outside. So that is how the largest. That's how Japan became the largest creditor nation on the planet. So if they can sell off these, if they can sell off the US treasuries and also sell off the substantial asset that they're carrying on their balance sheet, they can reduce their debt from 240% to something like 120%. They can do that, and then they can raise rates also. So what Japan needs to solve its problem is a Paul Volcker. What US needs to solve its problem is a God, right? So there is no way US was actually bailing out Japan. US was bailing itself out. Once they know that the actual crisis hits Japan, they'll start selling treasuries, and that the US government did not want. So they gave them the dollars despite Japan having $1.1 trillion. So this was not a bailout of the Japanese yen by the US government as is portrayed.
Actually, US was helping itself, not Japan.
Absolutely correct.
Right. So, कोई chance है कि is there any chance for yen carry trade unwinding?
Okay, Japan has to raise its interest rate. There is absolutely nothing that they can do about, because price inflation there is also running very high. So first they'll start selling assets to reduce. Now the point is they can't raise it immediately because of the huge levels of debt. Okay, but they can reduce that debt by selling off the assets, and subsequent to that they can start raising the rates. And I presume they'll start doing that sooner or later. It is just a matter of time. And at that point in time, the yen carry trade will start unwinding.
Okay. So now the third question is how India has positioned itself in terms of currency crisis, in terms of asset crisis, US, all these things. How India is positioned?
First thing, Neeraj, I think we'll talk some basic economics. Okay, because this is far too critical an issue. Now, economics is closer to a philosophy than to a science. And in that sense, if you really want to understand what happened, okay, you don't have to read the New Age gurus. Okay, you probably go and read what's what's really worked for the last 100, 200 years. How did the US become the most prosperous nation on the face of the planet? By following basic economic principles. Those principles have not changed. And if some new person comes and says there is a new way of thinking, like for example, Keynes did, yeah, just take pieces of paper, print some numbers, and those pieces of paper will start having value. All this is magic. This will unwind. So we are better off understanding basic economics and following those principles. And what are those principles? There's only one system that has delivered prosperity to the masses in all of history, and that is capitalism. And we better understand capitalism for what it is and start following those principles. The two basic tenets has to be limited government and sound money, right? And by limited what and by limited government, what I mean is that at least at a federal level, okay, don't keep too much powers, decentralize as much as you can. At the federal level, just keep the army, police, and the court systems. It's decentralized to the lowest body as much as you can. And two is actually sound money, and I would interpret that as limited budgets. Now, if you look at the economic spectrum, okay, there's something known as far left and far right. Okay, far left, all of us understand that is, and that's a communist who want to centralize everything. There's no concept of private property, and the government decides who owns what, who produces what, how much, etc. Okay, that's what the communists have been standing for, and that is repeatedly proven to be a failure. On the far right, you've got free markets. Now, we refer to BJP as a far right party. I cannot understand in what sense BJP is a far right party. It is far closer to communism than even to a centrist approach of economics. Now, so what I'm saying is common across party lines. I mean, whether the Congress or the BJP or AAP, the sound economic policy is the same across party lines, and that is doing something which is very close to capitalism, which is limited governments and sound money. All parties need to adopt this and follow this, and I have not heard a single person from either of the party talking about even the concept of a balanced budget. The only question is where do they spend it on? That's the only question. Nobody talks about the government balancing its budget. So when the crisis itself actually hits in the weeks and months ahead, what the Indian government has to do is to radically reform the way we actually conduct our business in the form of government. The government, especially the central government, has to downsize itself to the tune of 50-75%, run a balanced budget, decentralize the powers. Else, we are going to have a massive currency crisis in our hands. I can't see how under Modi 3.0 we can escape a currency crisis in India as well.
Right, very important. And even you see, there are some news, some not confirmed news, but there are some media discussions that in UP election, UP government can DBT 50,000 rupees per woman. So you are rightly saying they are not even thinking of it.
Right. No, now there's one important distinction I would make between the central government and the state governments, Neeraj. The state governments do not have access to a printing press. So I would not actually force the state governments to do something, because if they were to actually do something, the only way they can do it is by borrowing money from the markets. And there's a natural limitation onto that. It is a central government that has access to a printing press. So all they have to do is to run a balanced budget and tell the state governments that they cannot actually fund the expenses of the state government. You better meet your expenses from whatever the taxes they have to collect or from what you borrow from the market. And if they want to give a DBT of 50,000, 1 lakh, let them do so by borrowing from the market. And there's a natural limitation to that. It is a central government that we need to focus on, because they have access to this printing press that we call as the Reserve Bank of India. That is a point where we have to stop the crisis. We don't have to be so much bothered about the state governments. Now, there are so many policies of the central government that are so basically flawed. Now, let's take a simple thing such as tariffs. It is widely acknowledged that tariffs do not work at all, and yet we keep going back to it repeatedly. Let's take a basic thing as steel. Okay, we have something like 8 to 10% tariffs on steel because Chinese products are cheaper to our Indian products. Now, let me ask a basic question. In case China wants to give the steel for free to India, okay, will we accept it or not? Of course, we'll accept it. Assume they are willing to give it to us at I'd say 50% of the price at which we can produce. Will we accept it or not? Of course, we'll produce it. So at what point does a government decide that that is better for us to put a tariff than to accept a cheaper product from China? I mean, where does this discretion come in, and how do they decide? And what do they do as and when a tariff happens? What it means is you are raising the price of steel by about 10 percentage point here in India, and who pays for it? It is the millions and millions of Indian citizens. And who are the beneficiaries of it? It's a few tens of thousands of shareholders of the steelmaking companies. So why should millions of people subsidize who are mostly poor, subsidize a few rich people? It makes no sense to have these tariffs. And if China happens to give steel to us cheaper than actually what we can produce, so be it. Let's accept the steel, and it does so much benefit to the downstream industry. Say like if you look at auto components or cars or something like that. Now, I'm not saying the government should stay off. They can do a lot of things to reduce the cost of production steel. Say, for example, they can actually reduce taxes, or they can reduce the regulations, or they charge, as and when iron and coal are actually produced, they charge a substantive, say something like 36%. I don't remember the exact number. Okay, they can reduce it. Whatever they can reduce it to reduce the cost of production of steel in India, that they should do. Instead, they have taken the easy way of actually putting tariffs. Okay, when the government doesn't have to do anything to cut its expenses, and the steel companies don't have to bother about actually becoming more efficient. And the cost is borne by millions of Indians. Now, that's a first order effect. Now, if you look at the second order effect, if you look at auto component companies, we had a booming business. Now, about 50% of their cost is raw material cost. Now, if they have to use a steel that is about 10 to 15% more expensive as compared to the Chinese auto component manufacturers, how can they expect to compete? There's no way they can compete. And the same is true about automobile companies and all of the downstream impacts. Now, if you argue that it's important for us to produce steel rather than exporting iron ore and coal because it is downstream, should we not argue that it's more important to produce auto components or autos as compared to producing steel? So we have to, and this is basic economics. This is the law of comparative advantage, and quite independent of the philosophy that actually subscribe to, this law of comparative advantage holds. Why are they not recognizing it and doing the correct things, which is to dismantle the government? Again, it goes back to the concept of a government. The only reason why they're not able to cut the taxes or the royalties they charge is simply because the government size is too bloated. If they were to reduce the size and scope of government, okay, then they can reduce the taxes. These companies can become more cost efficient, and they can compete with all of the players globally. China doesn't have iron ore, China doesn't have coal, and still they are able to produce steel by importing iron ore and coal from abroad. We have both these things, and yet we are not able to compete against China, and that is because of the cost of government. So the solution to a whole lot of our problems has to come from the government reducing their size and scope dramatically.
Okay, sir, last question. ये जो आपने कहा कि एसेट में वॉर्स वाली सिचुएशन है कि कैश 22 अब इधर कुआं उधर खाई गिरना ही है आपको. How soon or any timeline you see when this bubble will burst?
Oh, we are very, very close. Okay, maybe we are weeks. Okay, maybe we are months. We are definitely not talking years. The bubbles today are so massive, okay, that it can't be sustained for long at this point in time. Okay, maybe after the midterm elections in the US, when Trump loses at the House, okay, this bubble might blow out. There are a huge number of bubbles, and there are a huge number of pins. Okay, which pin meets which bubble, I don't know. It's so hard to forecast. Okay, but something is going to happen in the next few weeks or few months. So by the end of 2026, I think we'll have a massive crisis on our hands. And quite independent of both these options, okay, which is a global financial crisis or a global currency crisis, gold is going to be the winner. If you have a global financial crisis, okay, gold is going to go up, but not so much. Okay, maybe it's going to go to $10,000 an ounce. And if you have a global currency crisis, it's going to be multiples of that particular number. So either way, gold is going to be the winner, and we are going to go back to a gold standard.
Perfect. So that's the scenario. शान सर का ये कहना है कि बहुत सारे बलून्स हैं, बहुत सारी पिन्स हैं, कौन किसको चुभेगा, क्या फटेगा पहले पता नहीं, लेकिन ये बहुत लंबे समय तक सस्टेन नहीं कर सकता. हो सकता है कि यूएस में नवंबर में जो इलेक्शन है 3 नवंबर को, उसके बाद कुछ बड़ी क्राइसिस है, लेकिन 2026 बिना क्राइसिस से जूझे हुए पार नहीं होगा। नंबर 1। नंबर 2 कि या तो करेंसी क्राइसिस होगी जिससे बहुत मुश्किल आएगी, या फिर एसेट बस्ट होंगे। दोनों सिनेरियो में गोल्ड विनर होगा, एक में ज्यादा होगा, एक में थोड़ा कम होगा, लेकिन होगा गोल्ड विनर ही। तो वो भी हमें नजर में रखना है। और सिचुएशन बहुत ही ज्यादा सीरियस है, इस बात को बहुत ध्यान से समझ लेना चाहिए कि ग्लोबल सिनेरियो में अब बहुत ही मामूली या आसान चीजें नहीं रह गई हैं। सर, थैंक यू so much for this
Yeah,
very
Neeraj, maybe I'll
thought-provoking.
just make one closing comment before we close, and that is
Sure.
on gold itself. Both China and India has about 30,000 tons of gold approximately. Okay, with the difference that China, in the case of China, it happens to be with the government, and in the case of India, it happens to be with the public. Right now, this is despite our governments. Our governments have continuously discouraged from our people from buying gold, but they've had the good sense to keep buying gold all through the decades. Now they have given our country a huge advantage as compared to China. We are the only country that can go back to a classical gold standard today, which is you don't have a central bank. Banks print their own money based on gold, and the system worked exceptionally well for about 100-150 years till the Federal Reserve came in. China can go back to a gold standard, but that will still be through a central bank. We can go back to the classical gold standard without having a central bank, okay, where we have free banking, as we call it as. Now, will our government recognize this and do the correct things, or will they pull defeat from the jaws of victory, as I see it as? Our citizens have given the country a huge advantage. If the government has a sense to use it the correct way, we can actually set ourselves on the road to prosperity. And that is by having a classical gold standard without a central bank, and by having a limited government, wherein we decentralize as much of our powers as possible.
Mhm.
Okay, so that is a solution to the problem as and when the crisis erupts.
Yes, that's the way. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for this thought-provoking discussion, and we'll keep doing in the future also. Sir, we are closing the show. Stay away for a few seconds. We'll close
Sure.
the show. Yeah. Thank you, sir.